Welcome to
It's Not Me.
It's My Personality, the podcast where we explore complexities of the mental health and human behavior. I'm Shanice,
And I'm Avery.
and we're your hosts for today's episode of the podcast. Today, we're diving into the world of Cluster A personality disorders. It's a group of mental health conditions marked by suspicious, eccentric, and socially isolated behaviors.
So, Shanice, what is Cluster A? Personality disorders.
Yeah, good question. So the cluster A personality disorders actually include three distinct disorders. So cluster A is also known as the suspicious cluster as it's characterized by behaviors that include social detachment, unusual perceptions, and cognitive distortions. So let's actually break this down further. So let's start with the first one in cluster A, which is the paranoid personality disorder. And this disorder is actually marked by long-standing distrust and suspicion of others. People with PPD believe without evidence that others actually want to harm, exploit, and deceive them.
So, what are key behaviors of this disorder?
Key behaviors of this disorder is hypervigilance, anticipating hostility, and sometimes initiating counterattacks as a defensive measure.
So, what happens during their childhood?
So, during their childhood, symptoms actually start early, with kids showing social anxiety, a lack of friends, and odd behaviors that might attract teasing or bullying.
And for their relationships, like interpersonal, romantic, family member relationships, what can happen between those?
So, as adults, maintaining relationships for people with PPD is actually challenging since there's jealousy, controlling behavior, and an inability to forgive other people are actually common barriers of this disorder.
And how do they cope with this kind of personality disorder?
So they cope with the personality disorder through projection, as this one dominates actually among others. It is like individuals may actually attribute their own like unacknowledged feelings or thoughts to others. So like if I'm denying that I'm not jealous of you being friends with other people, and then I was like, I'm kind of being negative towards you. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
So the next one of the cluster A.
Is schizoid personality disorder. So, what is that?
So schizoid personality disorder, or SPD, is actually defined by a lifelong pattern of social withdrawal, and people with this disorder are expressionless and show a limited range of emotional responses.
Can you tell me the key traits?
Yeah, sure. So the key traits of this one is that they are emotionally detachment, and then there's lack of close relationships and preference for solitude. So they like to be alone.
I like being alone. So then, what happens in these SPD disorders in their childhood?
So young people with SPD are actually loners, or they're often loners, and they actually perform really bad in school, and like they may actually face ridicule for their odd behavior. So they actually might be a target of bullying and teasing a whole lot during their childhood too.
And then, because of childhood, what happens during their adult life?
So in their adult life, actually they seldomly have rare relationships. So like if they ever do have one, like it's pretty rare. And even including relationships such as friendships or romantic connections, it's really rare for them to have this. And like especially when it comes to employment as well, it can actually be a challenge since it working with other people, it actually involves significant interpersonal interaction, and since they like to be alone, or they prefer to be alone, right? So it's gonna be a challenge for them.
And now we have schizotypal personality disorder.
Yeah, so schizotypal personality disorder, or STPD, stands out because of its strikingly odd and eccentric symptoms. They they think magical thinking, strange speech patterns, and inappropriate emotional reactions for this one.
What are some key traits of STPD?
So the key traits of STPD is like magical thinking, paranoia, odd beliefs, and severe social deficits.
What do you mean by social interactions?
So, with social interactions, people with STPD experience extreme anxiety in social settings, and their like speech can actually be like rambling and overly detailed, making it hard to follow. So, like when they're asked one question, they say like 100 different things. It's kind of like that.
Right. And then back to part of the key traits. When you were talking about paranoia, what do you mean by that?
So people with STPD, these individuals actually like often misinterpret like other people's intentions. Like they believe people are actually out there to get them. And like so this paranoia actually contributes to their social isolation.
And how can we raise awareness of STPD?
Well, an important thing to make note of with STPD or schizotypal personality disorder is that it's unlike schizophrenia. People with STPD can sometimes recognize their unusual behaviors or beliefs when it's pointed out to them, but with schizophrenia, it's actually quite the opposite as well.
So are there any risk factors or causes of this personality disorder?
So, while the exact causes are unknown for cluster A disorders, actually researchers suggest a mix of genetic, environmental, and neurological factors about this one.
What do you mean by genetics?
So, with genetics, I mean that having a first degree relative with like schizophrenia, or if they're diagnosed with schizophrenia, someone in their family, it actually increases a person's risk to develop schizotypal personality disorder.
Because they were raised around a person who had schizophrenia.
Is what they're saying because but it's probably because in their genes, because they're talking about like if you're directly related to a person with schizophrenia, like if I have a first cousin with schizophrenia, it's kind of something like that. Or like if my dad has schizophrenia, I would be at higher risk of like having developed this personality disorder.
Okay, thank you. Can childhood environment cause an effect?
Yes, definitely. That's one of the major causes and risk factors of developing personality disorders is childhood environment because of social isolation, neglect, or even trauma during their childhood way is actually a big thing because when you're growing up as a kid, like you might hold on to whatever happened in your childhood and bring it into your adulthood and it becomes like a mask or your defense mechanism of some sort.
Right. And then how do their like brains function? Like how does that work?
So like with the brain function of people with like cluster A personality disorders, there will be subtle differences in like brain structure and activity, but particularly in like the areas with fear and social processing that actually the researchers have noted on this.
So that is it for cluster A personality disorders, which reminds us that the human mind is both complex and fascinating. Understanding these conditions can help us foster empathy and support for others who are facing these challenges. If you enjoyed today's episode of
It's Not Me,
It's My Personality, be sure to subscribe and leave a review and join us next time as we continue to explore the
intricacies of mental health.
which we will be going on to cluster B of personality disorders. Thanks for watching.